For more than 1,500 years, one man's shadow has stretched over pretty much all of Western civilization. His name was Augustine of Hippo, and his journey from a life of, well, let's just say sensual indulgence, to becoming one of the most important saints in history is an absolutely incredible story. Today, we're diving into the life and the ideas of the man who gave us concepts like original sin and the city of God, and whose very personal struggles might feel surprisingly familiar. And this right here is the central puzzle of the man. On the left, you've got Saint Augustine, the church father, a pillar of theology. And on the right, a man in absolute torment, weeping in a garden, basically torn apart by his own desires. So how in the world did the guy on the right become the saint on the left? Well, the answer is in a life of profound conflict, a conflict he summed up himself in one of the most painfully honest prayers you will ever hear. You can almost feel the anguish in that, can't you? Lord, make me good, just not right now. This one line from his autobiography, The Confessions, just perfectly captures the war that was raging inside the young Augustine. It's this epic battle between the man he desperately wanted to be and the man he just couldn't stop being. So, to really understand the saint, you have to start with the sinner. Long before he was a bishop, Augustine was this brilliant, super ambitious, and deeply restless young guy living in the 4th century in Roman North Africa, what we now call Algeria. And trust me, he was living life to the absolute fullest. I mean, just look at the tension right here on this slide. On one hand, he's the son of a deeply Christian mother, Monica. He's a star student, always searching for wisdom and philosophy. But on the other hand, he lives with a woman he never marries for 15 years, has a son with her, and describes himself as a slave of lust, totally tormented by desires he felt he couldn't control. This wasn't just some youthful rebellion. No, this was a profound internal crisis that would end up defining his entire life's work. And there's this one story from his youth that really shows you how obsessed he was with the why of his own brokenness. As a teenager, he and his friends stole a bunch of pears from a neighbor's garden, and he writes about it for pages and pages, just agonizing over it. Now, why would he do that? Because he wasn't hungry. The pears weren't even any good. He stole them simply for the thrill of doing something wrong, for the love of the sin itself. To him, this wasn't just a prank. It was a terrifying look into the irrational, self-destructive core of human sin. You know, all that chaos in his personal life, it was totally mirrored in his intellectual life. He was a seeker, jumping from one worldview to another, desperately trying to find some system, any system, that could explain the world and, more importantly, his own inner turmoil. His mind was just as restless as his body. So first, he spent almost a decade as a Manichaean. This was a religion that saw the universe as this cosmic battle between a good, spiritual world and an evil, material one. And for a while, that seemed to explain his own struggles. But eventually, he found their answers lacking. So he drifted into this deep skepticism, doubting if anyone could know anything for sure. And then, finally, he found Neoplatonism, a school of Greek philosophy. It pointed him toward an ultimate, non-material source of all goodness, which was a huge breakthrough. It let him imagine a God who wasn't part of this messy physical world. And that idea paved the way for his return to his mother's Christianity. So, fast forward. By the time he's 31, Augustine is a big-shot professor of rhetoric in Milan, which was the capital of the Western Roman Empire. He's got fame, a great career, a new fiancé his mother picked out for him. He has everything. But on the inside, he's an absolute wreck. He's at a breaking point. And that's when he finds himself in a garden, about to have an experience that would change not only his life, but the world, forever. Just picture this scene. He's just heard the story of Saint Anthony of the Desert, this guy who gave up everything, wealth, status, everything, to follow God. And the story just shames him. It puts his own inability to commit, his spiritual paralysis, on full display. So he runs out to a garden, throws himself under a fig tree, and just completely breaks down, weeping and crying out to God. How long? How long? Tomorrow and tomorrow. And right there, in the middle of all this despair, he hears something. It sounds like the sing-songy voice of a child, maybe from a house next door, and it's chanting over and over again, Tolle lege, take up and read, take up and read. Now, he'd never heard a kid's game like that before. He immediately takes it as a command from God. He scrambles back to where he'd left a copy of St. Paul's letters, snatches it up, and just opens it to a random page, and his eyes fall right on this passage. And just like that, poof. In an instant, all the doubt, all the struggle, it just vanished. This was the answer he'd been looking for his entire life. The war inside him was finally over.
But that's not where the story ends. Oh no, that's really just the beginning. Augustine got baptized, he gave up his prestigious career, and he went back home to North Africa. There, he eventually became a priest, and then the bishop of the city of Hippo. And it was from there, over the next 3 decades, that the former sinner would become one of the most prolific and influential thinkers in all of history. Then, in the year 410, something absolutely unthinkable happened. Rome was sacked by invaders. For people at the time, this was like the world ending. Pagans started blaming the Christians, saying, "See, the old gods have abandoned the empire because of you." It was in response to this huge crisis that Augustine wrote his masterpiece, The City of God.
So in this massive book, Augustine basically reframes all of human history. He argues that, yeah, the fall of Rome is terrible, but in the grand cosmic scheme of things, it doesn't really matter. Because for him, real history isn't about the rise and fall of empires. It's about a spiritual battle between two invisible societies, two cities that are defined by what they love. It all comes down to what you love. The earthly city is made up of everyone who loves themselves, even to the point of hating God. It's the city of pride, power, and glory. Think Babylon or Rome. And ultimately, it's doomed to perish. But the heavenly city, that's made up of those who love God, even to the point of forgetting themselves. It's the city of faith, humility, and pilgrimage, and its final destination is eternal peace. For Augustine, your real citizenship isn't Roman or anything else, it's in one of these two cities. Now, this deep insight into human brokenness led him to another one of his huge and honestly most controversial ideas. Drawing directly from his own experience, especially that whole pair theft thing, Augustine developed the doctrine of original sin. He argued that when Adam and Eve disobeyed God, it didn't just affect them, it actually wounded human nature itself. So now we are all born with a will that is bent towards selfishness and away from God. And that is why we need God's grace. Because on our own, our will is just too weak and too corrupted to consistently choose what's good. Augustine died in the year 430, as barbarian Vandal tribes were literally at the gates, besieging his city of Hippo. But his ideas would go on to conquer the world, shaping medieval Christianity, the Renaissance, the Reformation, and even modern philosophy in ways he could never, ever have imagined. And here's where it gets really crazy, the great paradox of his legacy. He is, without a doubt, one of the most important doctors of the Catholic Church, a foundational saint. But then, 1,000 years later, the Protestant reformers, guys like Martin Luther and John Calvin, looked back and saw Augustine as their theological father. They used his writings on grace and predestination as the bedrock for their break with Rome. How wild is that? Both sides of the Reformation claimed him as their guy. But it's important to remember, while he was this giant in the West, his ideas didn't exactly take over the whole world. The Eastern Orthodox Church, for example, never fully got on board with some of his key ideas, especially his darker take on original sin and his theories on predestination. They always respected him as a saint, for sure, but a saint who maybe got a few major points wrong. So when you see this image of the scholar and the bishop, remember who's really behind it. It's that restless young man from Tagaste. The boy who stole the pears for no reason, the lover who wept for the partner he had to leave behind, the desperate man under the fig tree. His entire, massive intellectual system was built on the foundation of his own lived, painful, human experience. Which really brings us to the final thought, that struggle between what we want and what we think we should want. The real nature of freedom, the search for truth in a really confusing world. These were Augustine's questions almost 1,700 years ago, and I think the enduring power of his legacy is that, in so many ways, they are still very much our questions today.